It starts with a sound, a simple, almost mundane noise in the dead of night, a knock, then another, a rhythm in the darkness. To anyone else, it would be a nuisance, a mystery of a settling house. But to two young girls, shivering in their shared bed in a small farmhouse in Hydesville, New York in the spring of 1848, it was a conversation. They were speaking to the dead. And with every tap, every crack in the floorboards, they were unknowingly prying open a door for an entire nation, a door that would never fully close. This is not just a ghost story. This is the story of how modern spiritualism was born in that cramped bedroom, and of the three sisters whose lives would be forever entangled with the phantom they called Mr. Splitfoot. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a complaint. The Fox family, John and Margaret and their daughters Kate, age 11, and Maggie, 14, were frustrated. Their modest wooden frame house was, by all accounts, haunted by a poltergeist. It was a nuisance spirit. It created raps and knockings that echoed through the thin walls. It shook the furniture. It stole needles and thimbles. The girls, terrified, would huddle together in their bed, their hearts pounding in time with the inexplicable beats from the walls. One night, March 31st, 1848, the disturbances were worse than ever. The knocks were aggressive, impatient, and in a moment of sheer childish bravado, or perhaps divine inspiration, young Kate Fox clapped her hands. "Here, Mr. Splitfoot," she is reported to have called into the gloom. "Do as I do." She clapped twice. Two distinct knocks answered her from the void. The air in the room grew cold. Maggie, her voice trembling, joined in. She snapped her fingers a certain number of times. The same number of raps answered back. The entity could hear them. It could understand them. And it could count. The fear began to curdle into a terrifying, electrifying curiosity. This was no random noise. This was an intelligence. Their mother, Margaret, was summoned. She too was skeptical, until she began to ask questions. She devised a code. "Count my children," she demanded. 1 rap for Maggie, 2 for Kate, 3 for her other daughter, Leah, who lived nearby. The raps complied, perfectly. "Are you a spirit?" she asked. A single, thunderous knock shook the room. Yes. The identity of the spirit, it claimed, was a traveling peddler named Charles B. Rosma, who had been murdered for his money and buried in the cellar by a previous tenant.
The news spread through the tiny, God-fearing community of Hydesville like a wildfire. Neighbors flocked to the house, crowding into the small bedroom, their faces pale in the candlelight as they witnessed the impossible. They took turns asking questions, their voices hushed and reverent as the knocks spelled out answers from beyond the grave. Soon, the older sister, Leah, saw an opportunity that transcended mere local curiosity. A pragmatic and ambitious woman, she took Maggie and Kate under her wing and brought them to Rochester. The small-scale seances in the Hydesville bedroom became public demonstrations in crowded halls. The sisters became celebrities. They would sit at a table, the audience in darkness, and the raps would emanate from the floor, the walls, even their own persons. The messages were often comforting, assurances from departed loved ones that they were happy in the Summerland. For a society gripped by high mortality rates, particularly from diseases like consumption and cholera, and increasingly disillusioned with the stern doctrines of Calvinist predestination, the Fox sisters offered something revolutionary: hope. Tangible, audible proof that death was not an end.
The movement they spawned, spiritualism, became a cultural tsunami. It was a religion without a hell, a faith built on direct communication. It empowered women, who often served as the mediums, giving them a voice and a platform in a patriarchal society. Seances became a common parlor game for the upper classes and a profound spiritual practice for the masses. But with fame came scrutiny. Skeptics and scientists descended, determined to expose the fraud. They had the girls perform on felt-covered tables to muffle sounds. They held their feet. They made them stand on glass insulators. Yet, often, the rap still came. The investigators were often left baffled, some becoming converts themselves, while others left muttering about trickery they could not prove. The pressure on the sisters, however, was immense. They were the high priestesses of a massive movement, yet they were also human. The constant performance, the relentless gaze of the public, and the burden of their own secret began to take its toll. Maggie, in particular, fell into a deep depression, worsened by a tragic love affair and a growing dependence on alcohol. The sisters' unity began to fracture. The pristine image of the innocent conduits to the spirit world was cracking. And then, in 1888, the crack became a chasm. Maggie Fox, financially desperate and spiritually broken, was approached by a group offering her money to confess. She saw her chance for redemption, or perhaps just for release. She stood before a packed auditorium in New York City's Academy of Music. The air was thick with anticipation. Reporters scribbled on their notepads. Spiritualists in the audience glared, their faith on the line. Skeptics leaned forward, eager for vindication. Maggie, her face lined with the years of deception, held up her foot. She demonstrated how, for decades, she and her sisters had produced the raps. It was a simple, physical trick. The cracking of a joint in the big toe, a loud, percussive pop that could be amplified in a quiet room. She performed it over and over again, the sound echoing through the stunned silence. She explained how they had learned to do it as children, a macabre game that had spiraled out of control. She spoke of the weight of the lie, of the years of misery it had brought them. She declared it an utter fraud from beginning to end. The headlines the next day were brutal. "The hoax exposed," they screamed. The foundation of spiritualism, it seemed, had been shattered. But the story does not end with the confession. The human heart is a complex and contradictory place. A year later, Maggie Fox recanted her confession. In a signed affidavit, she claimed she had been paid and pressured by her enemies to lie. She swore that the raps were real, that the initial phenomena in Hydesville were genuine, and that she had only faked them later in life when her own powers began to wane. The public was left in a state of utter confusion. Who was telling the truth? The broken woman confessing her sin, or the desperate woman trying to reclaim her legacy? The final, tragic act of this story is one of silence. In 1891, boys playing in the cellar of the infamous Hydesville house, which had been moved to a new location as a tourist attraction, made a grisly discovery. Buried behind a crumbling wall, they found a human skeleton, along with a tin box of the kind a peddler might carry. The New York Times reported the find. The body was examined by doctors who confirmed it was that of an adult male. The legend of Charles B. Rosma, the murdered peddler, suddenly had a terrifying physical reality. Had the girls, in their childish game, truly stumbled upon a real ghost? Had their fraud been built upon a foundation of truth? Or was it a monstrous coincidence, a final cruel joke from the universe? The sisters never found peace. They died in poverty and obscurity, their names forever synonymous with one of history's most perplexing and enduring mysteries. The knocks in the night began their story, and it was the silence that followed their deaths that sealed their legend.